ModCons is all about showcasing modern conservatism, and what better way than speaking to the future of the party? For our new series, Candidates Cornered, I will be speaking with Conservative parliamentary candidates, starting with our general election 2024 intake. Today, I'm joined by Paul Athans. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Jamila. It's an absolute pleasure.
Now, actually, I'm going to quickly ask you, on your bio, it says born in the Northwest, but whereabouts were you actually born?
I was born in the Socialist Republic of Merseyside, so
Lovely.
Liverpool, and actually my first sort of interaction with politics was all Liverpool based,
Amazing.
which is fascinating because I didn't go with what the norm is for Liverpool, and I decided to pick the Conservative Party at a time when I first stood for the party at local elections. First time I ever voted for myself, in
Amazing.
2008. Yeah, I always like that as a little story. That was 2008, and we hadn't had a Conservative council in Liverpool since 1998. So,
Wow.
and still to this day have not. So it was quite a baptism of fire to be to grow up there and actually decide that my politics wasn't the politics of the norm in Liverpool. Every put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you've got like a bit of a Gillian Keegan story there then.
Yeah, very much. Yeah. And yeah, I know Gillian and get away with that. And actually, so I took a step back from politics when I went into the army, and that was when Gillian sort of came back into Liverpool to stand in Knowsley, I think it was in
Yeah,
2015.
I
And
think
so
so.
all the people I used to know, all best mates with Gillian, and I'd been in and out
Epic.
for that. Yeah.
So, Paul, so you were born in Merseyside and you studied politics at Liverpool University before joining the
Yeah.
army and serving for this great country in Afghanistan and Iraq. You were selected as a parliamentary candidate for Hazel Grove for the 2024 election. And you are a hero, but rather disappointingly, you are an Everton fan.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, you see, because I'm actually from Liverpool, I support Everton.
Right.
Unlike, like, most of Liverpool fans are not from Liverpool either. Some
They're
people would have a
glory
real,
hunters. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
yeah, exactly, yeah. You're like, when we haven't won anything since 1995, we're not hunting glory. It's like, we're
Exactly,
hunting
exactly.
survival. That's what we do.
That's it. So, Paul, you stood in the general election 2024 as the parliamentary candidate for Hazel Grove. How did it feel to win that selection?
Well, a friend of mine who was successful and became an MP, Ben Ben called me the selection sniper because I applied for one seat and I got it. But I was selected 12 months out. So my background was I was on the candidates list when I was 19, like back in like 2009 days, and I basically made the decision then that I was too young to stand. And what I'd have actually done is I'd have stood in my home seat at Liverpool Garston. I'd have stood against Maria Eagle, lost significantly, but it would have been a good attempt sort of thing. And I basically said, nah, I'm still too young. So I ran the parliamentary candidates campaign in 2010 instead. Then during the regular army. So stayed as a party member, supported the party, helped where I can, but I was away a lot. I lived in Cyprus for 3 years, I was deployed overseas, and also there's political restrictions on being in the regular army that lead to that. So then when it was actually during COVID that I sort of thought I got the political itch came back. And I'd always intended to go back into politics, but I did love and enjoy the army. And so I'd said, well, when it feels right, that will be the point when I look to transition to the next thing. Actually, the Hazel Grove selection came up in 2023. So the incumbent MP said in 22 he'd step down. So we were the second tranche of selections. And I thought, well, you know what, I have a Northwest regiment, so my regiment recruited from the Northwest. Hazel Grove was the start of the River Mersey. I was born on the River Mersey, so it was 40 miles away. I had a regimental connection. It was my part of the world, and I was like, well, you know what, I'm gonna give it a go, and was successful. Much to my shock, because everyone I'd ever spoke to had said, oh, you'll go through a few selections, it'll take a while. And I went for one and got it first time of asking, and it was a seminal moment. It took a few days for it to sink in, if I'm being really honest. And it was because I hadn't appreciated just how much my life had to change. Because I was regular army, I had to quit my job in order to be able to stand. And so it wasn't just, well, actually, I might become a member of parliament. It was a marginal seat. And in 2023, there was a distinct possibility I could have been, like, or at least I thought I could have been. But equally, I had to then come up with a way of, well, how do I quit the regular army? And for the past 12 years, I'd lived wherever the regular army sent me. Like it hadn't been my choice. It would always been wherever my posting went to. And then suddenly it was, I'd said to Hazel Grove, well, moment you select me, I'll move to the constituency, and did do. But that just completely changed everything in my life. No regrets whatsoever. Fantastic experience, fantastic place. I'm sure we'll go into it in a bit, but like I could have asked for more volunteers, but the volunteers I did have, I could not have asked for more from. They were absolutely fantastic, and it is a wonderful association and a wonderful Conservative family there.
Yeah, that it's actually good that you actually moved, because we know that that's always a point of contention when candidates say, "I'm going to come, I'm going to live here," and then
Yeah.
they're never there. So well done you for actually doing that.
Oh,
So Paul, what made you want to stand, and why would you do this to yourself?
yeah, yeah, it's a very odd question, isn't it? I think my issue is I don't remember at what point I became fixated on the idea of standing, but I'm pretty certain it was I did politics at A level, and I think I realised that I don't know of another job where you have the opportunity to help as many people as you can as a member of parliament. And even just as a simple member of parliament, I think it was Liam Fox passed a bill to do with supporting those with Down syndrome as a backbencher, got cross-party support, had something change for the benefit of loads of people. That's fantastic, right? And the fact is, I'm obviously not clever enough to be a doctor. So how else can I support and help as many people as I can? And I latched onto this idea that, well, actually it's to be a member of parliament. And that came to me at maybe 16, 17. And I did say, well, actually, no one likes a career politician. And I'm a believer of it was in my benefit, both personally from just seeing more of the world, understanding more of what it's like, and then equally from when I then went to appeal to associations to be their candidate and to voters to have done something else first. And so while at university, I was studying politics. I found the university branch of the army, the University Officer Training Corps. Thought this is fantastic. I really enjoy this. I'm quite good at it. And I was like, you know what, I'm gonna join the army. And so that is what I did. And I always had in me that I would probably go back into politics. But I went and I served, and it just gives you more of a grounding in what it means. Like as an infantry platoon commander, I saw like some of my soldiers came from absolutely terrible backgrounds. I had a soldier whose parents were heroin addicts. Like the army saved them. Like they gave them that social mobility, and that meritocracy to basically drag them out from virtually homelessness. You know what I mean? And for that is fantastic, and that really shaped me. And it just gives you a better grounding, I think, when you then go into politics to be able to relate to different segments of society, and also bring a different aspect. Like they bring a different perspective and go, well, actually. And I know the army has a reputation for discipline, for rigidity, and things like that. But also, it's just a slightly different perspective that aids it, and for me, that's the joy of politics. It's having as many people from as many different backgrounds as possible coming together to serve the country, to be able to then like bring those different ideas and different aspects together for the benefit of the nation.
Absolutely. And I think people often, like people, like the general public often say, why isn't the health secretary a doctor? Like people don't
Yeah,
understand why people who have expertise are not in those roles. So I think it's really important that we diversify the people that stand and for
yeah,
Parliament, so that we can get more people who actually know what they're doing into those roles that they're kind of.
yeah, yeah, completely.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes sense. But I'm sure you are smart enough to be a doctor. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, oh, thanks. That's very kind. Yeah, you have.
So you went on to join the army um after you graduated from university, or whilst you're at
Yeah,
uni, and then after. You spent 12 years serving in Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, Kenya, Cyprus. What did you love most about the army?
the people. Like it was absolutely, the army is a family, and my regiment will always be with me. When I got selected and had to leave the regular army, I transferred. I started in the territorial army, went regular for 12 years, left and went back into the army reserve. And I maintained my cap badge, which is the Duke of Lancaster's regiment, and that regimental family is always there. And there's an annual Army versus Navy match at Twickenham every year, and the platoon commanders that I served with in my first few years in the army We still go to that every year. We still meet up. We're still in contact. And that's that bond that you get from there is the thing I miss. And I got a piece of advice early on in the army that is in the army. You either want to be, if you're getting a staff job or any job, you either want to be at the pointy end or at the very top because the middle is terrible. The middle is just you're processing. You're just a gear in the machine. And I certainly experienced that when I was sat in a brigade headquarters. But when you're in a battalion and you're actually interacting with soldiers, they're just fantastic. Like they are absolutely fantastic. And they will always cause you problems, but they'll always make you laugh. And they are so dedicated to like the regiment, to the country. It is awe-inspiring always. And then the other side is being at the top, is being in a position where you see decisions getting made. And my last regular job was in the Ministry of Defence. So I worked in the Ministry of Defence, and it gave you a whole new perspective because you're seeing just how the machinery of government operates. You're seeing how decisions are being made at the highest level. And you're also getting a different perspective of, well, if you've never seen how generals operate, but suddenly you're sat in the back of a room and seeing all them having a discussion, you're suddenly in a position to be able to go, well, actually, that guy is exceptional, and maybe that guy's not as good as I thought he was, and you get a whole new view on just how everything operates. And the Ministry of Defence was fantastic for me because I also got the opportunity to work in ministers' offices. So I worked as an army officer, but like basically like a military assistant for Leo Doherty, for Andrew Morrison, for Sarah Atherton, and for Ben Wallace as well. So it was always on secondment, so it was never like for protracted periods of time, usually a couple of weeks in a go. But that was really fascinating to see firsthand, and critically on the other side than a politician, just how government operates. Because there's one thing of knowing what it's like to be with like lead soldiers on an exercise or serve in Afghanistan, whatever it is, but also just seeing how the decisions are made at the political and strategic level is really, really informative to going forward. And it was I think, if I say my one niche like advantage going into politics is I've seen what the strategic decision means at the tactical level and what tactical decisions can mean at the strategic level and vice versa. And linking them together often can get lost as it goes down. And so a well-meaning strategic decision can have a poor tactical outcome, sort of thing.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. It kind of seems like it was a bit of a calling for you. We had news recently that 30% of under 40s would refuse to serve in the armed forces in the event of a world war. So like, young people just aren't really that keen or bothered to want to serve their country. It's pretty woeful, but what can we do to restore pride in our country and also, the desire to actually want to fight for your country? If it came to that, how can we get more young people engaged?
Well, that is probably the question of today and going forward, right? Like it's a matter of public record that both under us and continuing under Labour, there is a problem with recruitment and retention, right? And there's many reasons for that. One reason is the fact that the Conservative governments had catastrophic success with unemployment, right? We got unemployment to the lowest level ever. And unfortunately, the historical trend is if unemployment is high, recruitment into the army is high. And if unemployment is low, recruitment into the army is low. And that is not because the army is the choice of last option, but it is also a case that where you have a booming economy and you have low unemployment, like the public sector will never compete with the private sector in terms of finances, right? And there is within the armed forces, with the development of technology and the advance of technology, you need more technically minded people. So if you take cyber warfare as an example, you train someone up to be a cyber specialist. Well, you're still paying them a government wage, essentially, and they could go and earn 10 times as more in the private sector. So that's a perennial problem from the retention side. The question of how do you get people to believe it? I think I'm going to spin one anecdote, and that is Canada. So all Western countries have had broadly the same sort of stats that you've said, right? Like Western countries in the round, NATO members have seen problems getting people to join the army, and that statistic of under 40s not willing to serve their country is replicated over there. There's a notable exception in 2025, and that is Canada. And Canada hit its year's recruitment targets in the first quarter of the year. Now, I would not like to say why that is directly, and Canada refusing to say why. However, perhaps it had something to do with the adjacent country, which made a suggestion that they would be the 51st state, right? And there is a thing about existential threat. And so, where in the world do you not have a problem with recruiting? Where do you have large reserves? Where do you have that? Any country that borders Russia. You know, you go to Estonia, Latvia, Finland, Lithuania, they do not have a recruiting problem because the threat is real. You know, they are on the border with Russia. They've seen what's happened in Ukraine. The threat is there. The threat is real. And, you know, I'm sure there may have been people in that country who said, "Oh, I'd never fight for my country." But when the actual, you know, chips are down and you see that Russia might be rolling over your border, you pick it up. And I think that is the main factor that's happened in Canada because there's not much else that's changed in Canada. This is pre-election, you know, but it was essentially there was a perceived, whether real or not, threat to Canada, and the Canadian public turned around and came out in their droves. And so I would hope that the polling at the moment is hypothetical polling, but actually your mind changes when that threat is real. And the challenge that we will have and that Labour have is how do we explain to people that that existential threat is real, that that threat is real. And you know, early this year, Russia sailed a fishing trawler, the Antar, which was absolutely a spy ship, um, off the coast of England. It was almost certainly tracking undersea cables, like and attacking that critical national infrastructure. And yes, can I foresee a scenario tomorrow where Russian tanks land on the White Cliffs of Dover? Absolutely not, right? Like that is not where we are. But the grey zone activity is real, and there is that constant risk of damage to critical national infrastructure, cyber attacks on our transport systems, on our energy systems, all those sort of things, and that is there. And so the challenge we have is not scaring the country into the days of the 1980s with adverts about what to do in the event of a nuclear holocaust, but it is making sure the public start to understand that that threat is there and that threat is real. And when that threat is understood, I hope people will reconsider the concept of, well, maybe I will go and serve. And one of the things that, as part of the policy renewal program, I know that the Conservatives are looking at, and under James Cartledge, the Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, is, well, actually, what role will the reserves play in the future? Because also, if we can capture that public mood of service, but people don't want to commit full time, well, it is reserves are the way forward. And how do you reshape a reserve forces to maximise people joining it and being part of it? Because in Ukraine, it's not the regular forces that are holding on now. There are some, but they're mostly in the command positions. It's the reserve forces who have stepped in to fill the backlog. And when I was in the MOD, I had the honour of accompanying a minister to visit Ukrainians being trained on UK soil. And I watched an 18-year-old stood next to a 16-year-old, both being trained how to fire an artillery piece. And that is dedication to your country, that's commitment to the cause, and that is what volunteering looks like when you have that existential threat. Yeah.
I agree with you on that. I think maybe that is the thing. People aren't really taking it that seriously. They think, oh, it's like, it's all words. They keep saying the world has changed. It just sounds all a
Yeah.
bit far away. But maybe things like the reserves, like you say, and maybe getting more young people involved in things like cyber could be a good way to get them in without them knowing that they're getting more involved.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. And like there are those on the left who hate cadets because they just see it as like child soldiers and child recruiting. But I violently disagree, right? Because actually, I would be calling for a vast expanding of our cadets, right? Because it teaches people a little bit about the military, it teaches people a little bit about service. Whether they choose to join the army after that or not, it doesn't really matter. Like I'm sure some would, and that's great for recruitment, but equally, it's about inculcating and understanding what the military is, what it is. And that happens at every level. There is an armed forces parliamentary scheme for MPs, right? Because people turn up to Parliament and the Ministry of Defence and each of the three services, well, actually four with Stratcom, run the armed forces parliamentary scheme. And they take MPs to visit army bases, air force bases, Royal Navy bases, and say, what is what does it actually do? Because you could find yourself as a member of Parliament, have zero knowledge of what the military or the armed forces do, and be asked to vote on, well, how much should we fund defence? What should we do with that money? That sort of thing. And so the armed forces parliamentary schemes to do that education for members of Parliament. Well, I'd love for more cadets to be able to do that and get that education in early and understand that from an early age. And maybe you would see a change in that mindset, not necessarily a direct change in recruiting, but a change in the percentage of people who say, well, actually, if I'm needed, I would stand up and serve.
Absolutely. I think you're right. It's about changing the mindset and things like the cadets. They're so good for young people. I mean, we always talk about mental health. We always talk about crime rising amongst young people. Though
Yeah.
the cadets could solve those two things pretty quickly, or at least minimize the chance of that happening. So I completely agree with you. So let's talk about the other stuff, the elephant in the room, the Chagos elephant in the room. So
Yeah, the friend attack.
yeah, I mean, we've heard that today or yesterday that it was confirmed. Also, again, before a parliamentary recess, can we just add that he keeps trying to
Yeah,
slip
yeah.
this in before it can really be debated. But we heard that Keir Starmer obviously is going through with the Chagos Island deal. He's signed it to give away for some say 10 billion, some say 30 billion, some say 40, depends on which party you're asking. But a lot.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it is an act of insanity. Like James, I cannot find a military person, and they're not people who are going to go on the record because they're serving. But when I speak to my former colleagues, no one can give me a good operational justification for doing this, and there are only negatives. And for me, there's a lot of politics involved in this. The finance question is literally insane. And coming from the Ministry of Defence budget, okay, great, you've raised defence spending, but all of that defence spending is actually now going to Mauritius. Um, that is terrible. Let's park it for 1 second. There's two things that really stuck out to me. The first one is the fact that there is a clause within that treaty, and I hate to say that I have read that treaty, which basically says there's a requirement for the UK to inform Mauritius whenever they launch an operational attack on anything, right? So if we are going to attack, Iranian militias, or Iranian proxies, who are attacking our shipping, we have to tell Mauritius before we do. That is categorically insane. And the Prime Minister came out and tried to make out that Kemi Badenoch was in the same column as Russia, Iran, and China. Like, absolutely insane. Like 2 weeks ago, I think it was the Chinese foreign minister or a representative, it's certainly a representative of the Chinese Communist Party, basically came out and said, "Yeah, we think this deal is a great idea for us," right? Like China is actively increasing its working relationship with Mauritius. Russia is doing the same thing. They literally just signed a deal on increased fishing rights. Let's remember what the Yantar was. It was a fishing vessel, right? Like this is absolutely insane. It's insane because it's damaging to the national interest, and there is no legitimate reason for doing it. And all of Labour's counter arguments are incredibly poor. Their line is, "Oh well, you started the negotiations." Yes, but like negotiating is not signing a deal, right? Like, and you can negotiate for 30 years, right? But if the deal is not in the national interest, then you don't sign it. And what this government appears to be doing is signing anything that's put in front of it. It doesn't matter whether the deal looks good, whether the deal,
Totally.
yeah, yeah, like all of it. I mean, let's take the European. Don't forget the start of the week with the European Security Pact, right? And that was where we signed a deal with the EU, where we sold our fishing industry, and that we were supposed to be to get access to 150 billion EU fund. I've also read the deals of the security partnership, right? And it says we will explore the possibility of joining it. So we've literally
Exactly.
played our best hand and got nothing in return. We've got the possibility of it. And this is going back to Chagos, the threat that they talk about is a hypothetical legal threat. Hypothetical legal threat. There is no military threat. There is no actual binding judgment in an international court to say we have to give it away. And Mauritius has never actually owned these islands. It's a claim. So my biggest issue with all of this is that I genuinely don't know why they've done it. And my suspicion is, this is a party of who fail to understand the difference between members of parliament make the law, lawyers follow the law, right? And so they've gone, well, the law says this, therefore we must do it. What they haven't done is, oh, but hang on, we're the party of government. If the law doesn't benefit the country, we can change that law to our benefit. They haven't done that. They have just capitulated and are paying. We're paying for the privilege. Taxpayers are paying for the privilege. And
Absolutely.
yesterday, not only did they slipped out the sentencing review, they did the Chagos deal. They also slipped out a load of pay awards including they've just raised accommodation charges for the armed forces by 7.6%. A fact that has gone completely unnoticed because they did the classic thing of last day of Parliament and we're just going to dump everything in one go. Because guess what? You can't make the newspaper longer. There's only so many column inches. So if we do a load of bad things in one go, well, maybe they'll all go different. And unfortunately, looking at the front pages today, that is what's happened. Every newspaper seems to have gone down a different piece of bad news that they slipped out in the day. But for me, Chagos is, as you say, the elephant in the room. That is going to have a long-standing detrimental impact on Britain's national interests. And for Keir Starmer to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, but the US supports this deal." Well, of course they do, because it's a US base, and they're not paying
It doesn't cost them
anything
anything.
for it. Yeah,
It's probably like, yeah, if you want to do it, if you want to pay for it, yeah, of course, go for it. We didn't give it, like, we don't care. It doesn't bother us.
exactly. Exactly. It's not. They don't support the deal because it somehow makes us safer. They support it because they're getting it for free. like, if I was them, I'd support it. Of course. Crazy. There you go.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. Like from every angle you look at it, it doesn't make sense. It's absurd. And people must be looking at this country like, what's happened to Britain? Why has Britain just like lost its mind? And like you say, it's like we will literally sign any deal that's on the table. Doesn't matter if it's good, we'll just sign it. So we can go up in Parliament and say, I've signed 10 deals. They're all terrible.
It's also it's the arrogant. It's the
Yeah,
arrogant the way that they do it, as if like, well, of course this is the right thing to do, and you're like, well,
totally.
I don't know if you saw the report around the number 10 spokesperson went into a journalist huddle after the announcement, and
Yeah.
not one, but like most of the journalists have reported it as the worst huddle that they've
Yeah,
ever
I had
experienced.
this. Yeah.
And it's interesting that it was difficult to find. I think I found one journalist who backs this deal. Like almost from across the political spectrum, the lobby have said, but sorry, what? This doesn't really make sense. The things don't add up. And the finances, the figures that you mentioned at the start, is it 10 billion, is it 30 billion, is it 40 billion? Well, what the government said is 3.4, and that is mathematically rubbish. And yes, there is treasury accounting for how to do it, but that treasury accounting is based on the longer term, the further down the line. What is fact is that in the first year we give 165 million to pay to loan the place. We give 45 million for 25 years. So we give 45 million for just basically like sorry Mauritius, and then we give 40 million to a Chagosian fund, right? And so over the first 5 years, that is £1 billion. Now that is not subject to Treasury Green Book rules. That is £1 billion, £1 billion over 5 years to lease back something that we currently own. Absolutely insane. And I don't know
Crazy.
if you did. I don't know if you did see the debate in Parliament, but like a Labour backbencher who has a load of Chagosians in his constituency stood up, and he was even more livid than we were
Yeah, he
because
was
he's like,
fuming.
they've been sidelined.
I think one of the things that and I know you've mentioned it, but the most shocking thing I think, apart from all of it, which is all shocking and ridiculous, is the fact that he made such a big deal of wanting to raise, or he was going to raise the defense budget to 2.5%, and it's all just been pilfered away on Chagos.
Yeah, I mean, so we went into the election with a plan to 2.5, and it was 2.5 at the end of the Parliament. And what changed? I mean, like a lot has changed, right? There has been no defence secretary, to my knowledge, in the 14 years of Conservative government that didn't want more money for defence. But let's not forget the situation we're in 2008, 2009, 2010. Labour crashed the economy. They left us no cash. And, Cameron and the coalition government, and then Cameron in 2015 was elected off the back of fiscal prudence, right? So, and there was also the reality of the post-Cold War peace dividend, right? Like the end of the Cold War, the fall of communism. There was in the 1980s when we were spending 5+% on defense, like that it wasn't appropriate anymore. People wanted more money spent on health, and there's a great graph that basically shows defense spending used to be up here, health spending used to be there, and it's gone that way, right? And that's understandable. But things changed in 2022. They did change, and they've continued to change, and it has taken a while to wake up. And what the Conservative government did, and something that I was proud to sort of play a role in from a military side, is gift huge amount of support to Ukraine. But again, if you deplete your national stockpiles to support another country, you need to replace those stockpiles. So the short-term focus for the Conservative government was essentially getting Ukraine to survive to get through the fight. And now we are in a position where we're going, well, no, we do need to increase defence spending. And so I will always welcome an increase in defence spending. But what they announced was, I would say, far too little and on far too long a timescale. So the Kemi came out and said we would now get to 3% by the end of this parliament if if we were in power, and I completely agree. It's difficult to say where should the percentage spent be, and I say that because it's quite how. Let's talk about the strategic defence review. So Labour said we're going to have a strategic defence review. Still hasn't published. They said it'd be published in the spring. Well, yesterday was the last sitting day of spring. There's still no strategic defence review, but here we go. In that, how I think you should run a strategic defence review is you say, what is the threat? What capabilities do we need to combat that threat? How much is it going to cost? Right? What Labour did was, how much do we have? What is the threat? What can I afford? Right? and I'll be honest, that is the way that the strategic defence review have been done. Right? But that is essentially what they've done. So they've said 2.5, but actually there's no real indication of whether that increase in defence spending is actually going to go towards capability at all. As you said, Chagos is going to eat a huge chunk of that, certainly in the short term. And equally, well, we do need to refill stockpiles and all those things. So when the Strategic Defence Review publishes, is it actually going to say anything for the future? How is it going to do it? And what would we as the Conservatives do differently? Well, we could propose capability choices now, but ultimately, I think the logical thing to do is wait for the Strategic Defence Review to be published. We know it's going to be rubbish. And we then say, well, okay, what would we have done differently? Because the review itself has been led by some eminent people. Lord Robertson was, yes, he was the Labour Defence Secretary, but he was also Secretary General of NATO. Richard Barron's independent, former head of Strategic Command or Joint Forces Command, I think it was then, and Fiona Hill, who used to be Obama's, I think, one of his national security advisors, right? A prominent thing, but the issue is that they say, here's the problem, here's what you need to do, and then it goes to the Treasury, and the Treasury go, no, we can't afford that, and so I'm really interested to try and get to the bottom of when the strategic defence review is published, how similar to what was originally proposed by the reviewers is that final report going to be? Because we all know we need to spend more money on defence, but the answer is not to basically fudge the figures, which is what Labour have done with this defence spending announcement. They've just used clever accounting to make it seem like we're spending more. We haven't actually committed. Meanwhile, Poland has hit 5% of GDP on defence spending. Germany is committing more, and Britain has fallen behind. And it's sad because actually there is an opportunity here, which as Europe rearms, if we were thinking boldly about reducing red tape for our defence industry, investing in SMEs, small medium enterprises in the defence space, Britain could become the defence exporter of choice for a Europe that is rearming. But unfortunately, under a Labour government, I just like a lot of positive words, very little positive action.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that sums up this Labour government. It's all.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, you talked about you talked about what the money is being spent on, and I was going to ask you that question, but you've kind of pretty already answered that, which is fantastic. One of the things that came to my mind when I was thinking about this is veterans. So obviously there was a lot of talk about veterans when Johnny Mercer was the Minister for Veteran Affairs, and he did a lot around mental health for veterans. But we always heard a lot of stories about the accommodation of veterans. What can we be doing for our veterans? Surely, the stories that negative stories don't help to encourage more people into the army. So what can we do to also, show respect to the people that have served this country and look after them?
Yes, I mean, Johnny has to be really praised for the thing he did, because he made tangible difference to veterans. But I think the most important did is he just raised the profile of it. It was something that was sort of taken for granted. That was, we all support the veterans, but we support veterans basically on November the 11th every year. We'll wear our poppy, walk out, give them a salute, and then forget about them for another 12 months. And Johnny really raised the profile of veterans issues. Now, the UK is different to other countries in terms of what it means to be a veteran and what can you do for the veterans. And I suppose there's a lot of comparisons between us and the US. There's differences because in the US they don't have an NHS, right? So in the US, if you've served a number of tours, I think it is, then you get access to free healthcare as a veteran. So a veteran status is really important, but actually it's a different thing because we do have free healthcare in the UK. So that isn't a direct comparison. But I think the big thing that for me, that one of the great things that Johnny did was he introduced it's about getting veterans into employment. And something I do I'm a trustee of a veterans employment charity, a charity that works to get people into employment because the military have got a lot better at preparing people for civilian life. But equally, unemployment is quite low, which means the jobs market is quite tight right now. Unemployment is rising a little later, but the jobs market is quite tight right now. So how do you sort of, and the key thing is translating the skills you learned into the civilian sector. And sometimes it's quite easy. If you've been a pilot, guess what? It's really easy to go and get a job in the civilian space as a pilot. If you are an electrical engineer, again, same difference. If you've been an infantry soldier, how do you explain like what it is you learn? Because people think, oh, you're an infantry soldier, great, you know how to shoot people. How does that relate to the civilian sector? And actually, the Armed Forces Covenant, again introduced by us, getting employers to sort of really look at veterans as an asset, sign up to the Armed Forces Covenant, focus on employing them, has made a tangible difference because employers are turning around and going, well, you know what? Right, actually, if I hire an ex-army person, I know they're going to be there on time, they're going to work hard, and they're going to be super reliable. And reliability, actually, in today's world, is really valued. So even if you don't have a engineering skill or something else, the fact that you've spent time in the military is a force multiplier. And then equally, the Conservatives introduced an employers tax holiday. So it was national insurance holiday for employers who hire a veteran who's in his first 12 months after leaving the military, right? And we had committed to extending that when we were in government, and then Labour have come in and they've said they'll extend it for 1 year, but they will not commit to extending it over. So that's something that certainly, I'll be joining like with as many Conservatives as I can to champion that, to keep that in, because that's like literally the first year that was introduced, I think, and I quote from the Public Accounts Committee, it was the cost was negligible, right? So it's not something that's going to cost a fortune, but actually it's a real help to give an advantage to getting veterans into that employment. And unfortunately, there is a case of we talk about like accommodation, and we talk about like mental health provision, and unfortunately, it wasn't good back in the day. And the fact is if someone leaves the army now, the support they can get from a mental health perspective as they're leaving, as they're in the services, is a million times better than it was, for example, after the Falklands War. And I remember speaking to a Falklands veteran saying, like, I've got PTSD now, like the army did nothing about it. The problem is you can't change what happened in the past. You can't go back to that point in time and go, maybe we need to learn and understand about this. And I'm really pleased that my time in the military, I saw a sea change in terms of how it's treated, how it's understood.
Like I said, it's really good that we have people who understand their industries in Parliament. So you obviously stood as a candidate in the general 2024 election. I hope that you would stand again. If you do, in your idea, what does the future of the Conservative Party look like, and where do you think we need to be in 4 years?
If we talk about now, then the sort of elephant in the room for me is reform. And I think the problem we have genuinely is Labour have been too rubbish too quick. Because it is undeniable that we lost the general election, and the way I generally describe it is we lost that election. Labour didn't win it, and I experienced that on the doorstep. I spent 12 months knocking on doors, and people go, I've always been a Conservative, but people said to me, I'm going to stay at home this time. And not a lot of people have talked about the reduced turnout in the last election, but almost all of them were Conservative voters who said, you know what, you need a bit of time out. It wasn't a specific thing. It was just, you need a bit of time out of government, come back in 5 years. And so there were people who were basically willing to give Labour a try, but they haven't forgiven us yet. And they've now experienced Labour and they've gone, oh my God, they're 10 times worse. Like, they're absolutely horrendous. And so people have understandably turned around and gone, well, I've not forgiven the Conservatives yet, but I hate these guys even more. Where else am I going to go? And so they're looking around. And so what my hope is that a lot of the votes for reform and the Lib Dems, also get the original protest party, are protest votes. And I think the big challenge for the Conservative Party, which we're definitely on the right track, but it just more needs to be done, is to re-establish the credibility that we need as a credible opposition and a credible party of government again. And that is, trust takes a long time to build, and it's quick to lose. And so our focus has to be on rebuilding credibility and trust to deliver, trust to have integrity, and trust that actually, for me, it's less about policy and it's more about principle. And it's more about showing that when we say we're going to do a thing, we're going to do that thing. Like, it's not promise one thing, deliver another. It's got to be that. And so if we're trusted on delivery and we're trusted on economic competence and we're trusted that actually we're a party of integrity, that is our path back into power. And that doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. And so the next few years are going to be really key of just rebuilding that trust. And I also think that, reform is one man essentially, and that man has already caused problems. Like the whole Rupert Lowe saga with Farage kicking him out, and then the spat that's going on there. Will Nigel actually get through to the next election still in the position he is? Will people like, our new mayor of Lincolnshire, whose name has temporarily escaped me, but she used to be.
Jenkins.
Yeah, Andrew Jenkins. I was like, can't remember the surname. Yeah, like, is she going to be so successful that people go, oh God, yeah, reform's really competent at governing, or is that going to be a mitigated disaster where you can turn around looking at? I think it's going to be the latter. And it is difficult often to draw parallels between the performance at a local level and the performance at a national level. If we're solely looking at the performance at a local level and comparing it to national, well, actually, if you look at Labour ran Birmingham in any way whatsoever, you would have known that this was going to be a disaster, right? So and having grown up in Liverpool, that is also the case up there. Let's not forget, Liverpool City Council was put into special measures and taken control of by the central government. So dire a state was it in, and then the former mayor of Liverpool has been charged with fraud, and yeah, so it is a catastrophic disaster. So, what is the future for the Conservative Party? I've got a bit off track there. It is about rebuilding that trust. It's rebuilding that trust, and so the public can come back. And I think there is certainly what I saw in Hazel Grove was there were people who they were angry and they wanted to send a message, but they are still Conservative voters at heart. And we cannot take them coming back for granted. We cannot just assume they will, but our focus should be regaining them, bringing them back, and just demonstrating that we're credible and we're competent.
I always joke that it's kind of like we're kind of like an ex-boyfriend where, still too soon to see us again, but you
Yeah, yeah,
bump
yeah.
into us on a night out in a few years and feel like, oh, I'll give
I
them a.
like that. It's a good, yeah.
But with reform, like quickly, it is funny. Like obviously, it is slightly cult like when you go on the door and people are like, I'm reform, and you're like, okay, I get it, I understand why. But Nigel Farage this week has been completely absent, and it just goes to show that this guy is only out for himself. Like when this country needs,
Yeah.
a voice, he's nowhere to be seen. He's on holiday, and he doesn't care to come back anytime soon, which is just wild.
When Parliament is sitting.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
he could
yeah.
have gone tomorrow. Hello.
Yeah. If Labour decided to announce Chagos next week, yeah, fair enough, right? It's a parliamentary recess, but no. Like, this is a sitting week. You're being paid to be in Parliament. Yeah, like
Yeah.
100%
Yeah,
agree.
doesn't
Yeah.
care. So, lastly, Paul, it's a two-pronged question. What do you love about being a member of the Conservative Party, and why are you a Conservative?
the why a conservative is always a different one to answer. I know a lot of people say freedom. For me, it's about opportunity, and we are the party of opportunity. Yeah, neither of my parents went to university. I went to a grammar school. I went to the only grammar school left in Liverpool, and I went to university, became an officer in the army because of that opportunity for social mobility that came from the conservative ideology, the conservative values, the conservative ideals. And so, I still see Labour as a party of outcomes, not a party of opportunity. You can see that with VAT charges on private schools. I didn't go to a private school, but I disagree with the policy because you're just trying to bring people down, not give people the opportunity to go up, right? And that for me is the defining difference between Labour and the Conservatives, and that is more than anything else. That is the thing that makes me go, no, no, this is where I am. I mean, don't get me wrong, Labour are doing a fantastic job of making sure that I would never ever consider like crossing a floor. I mean, Chagos is the unforgivable, but there we go. And then what do I love about being a member of the Conservative Party? I mean, I I, I admire the level of support and activism that still goes in from people and the dedication that all volunteers put in, right? Like ultimately. And I go back to my time in Hazel Grove. My campaign manager Nat, she was in her 60s. My association chairman John, man in his 60s, they came out all the time. They came out night, day, all the time. They were eminently reliable. Nigel, another one of my other campaigners, he'd only joined the Conservative Party like 2 or 3 years before, and he was there all the time. He was my fixer. One day I got a text from Michelle Donnellan, and he was the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation, and Technology at 8 p.m. in an evening, being like, I've had a meeting cancelled. I'm in the area. Can you set something up tomorrow? And I rang Nigel. I was like, can you get me a visit to an engineering factory? And he was like, mate, no problem. And then there was the next day. I'm stood with the cabinet minister and Nigel in a precision engineering firm being shown how the equipment works. And I was like, this is fantastic. And it's those people who make it, and those people who give that dedication. And it's them that it meant that on a grim night in July 24, I could turn around and see people that had worked. And it also meant that whilst I was personally gutted, my focus was on them, not me. My focus was on saying to them, thank you for the support, thank you for all you've done, thank you for putting your trust in me. It didn't work out, but thank you. And that was because of the dedication. And you know what? And it wasn't me. It was a dedication to a party. It was dedication to their area, and it was getting a Conservative in that area. And yes, they supported me, but I know they'd give that same level of support to whoever the candidate was, because it was their belief in Conservative values and the principles of conservatism that was the thing that was driving them, and that was just inspiring.
Paul, that's a beautiful, beautiful note to end on.
Oh,
Thank you so, so much. It was fascinating, and I've learned a huge amount, and I'm sure everyone else has. Thank you so much for joining me on ModCons.
thank you very much, Jamila. It's been an absolute pleasure. Have me back in the future.
I would love to. Thanks.